started. Okay. And I think everyone else should know Lisa. Lisa's here, first time. Doug, you probably remember Lisa from church on Sunday, and Carol. So everyone meet Lisa.
Mm.
All right.
Good to be met.
And Lisa doesn't have a book yet, so I'll read slowly and articulate well. How's that?
Yeah.
Okay. Any leftover business from last week? Anything anyone needs to discuss?
Just real quick.
Go ahead.
I won't touch on it long, but I finally caught up on the reading and actually went ahead finally. But Becky had brought up that point about the age, of 35 or whatever Rohr spoke of. And anyway, I just you may have covered this because I haven't been on everything, but I just sometimes wonder, is it the Western brain that wants this first half, second half, like thunderbolt experience, or is there many first half, second half experiences in many ways that you're always having this rebirth, this new thought versus gee whiz, I missed it, or I'm hitting it late, or I wonder if it has to be such a black and white first half, second half, or if there are many aspects, many layers that you're hitting this first half, second half type of thinking.
Good question.
Does that make sense?
I think so. I think I know where you're going. If I start answering something you didn't ask, then let me know. But I think I'm understanding.
I think it's black and white thinking sometimes. I think first half, second half. I just don't know if it's as clean as that. I think it's you may have many of these first half, second half aspects of different parts of your life always going on. So anyway, that's enough. That makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I think we've been banging around long enough to realize that when it comes to spirituality, nothing is black and white. Nothing is either or. Nothing is dualistic. And so, yes, this will be another spectrum, like a lot of the things that we talk about, and it can happen differently for everyone. And it's not going to be necessarily spectacular. It's not going to be something that announces itself. Okay, here we are moving into the second half of life. No, it's going to be something that can be gradual, and it can sneak up on a person. What we're trying to do, though, is give the map to the journey and the shape of the journey clearly enough that we can see what's happening while it's happening and help it along. If we can be more intentional about what we're doing from this transition and move from first to second half, and if we can help it along in all the various ways that it presents, as you're talking, Doug, then it can be a clearer process for us, the more aware we are of it. And so that's why I think a study like this is important, because it does give us a shape, gives us some milestones along the way, even though everyone's experience is going to be unique to themselves. So,
okay.
Yeah, that help?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, I realize what you're saying is that when we talk about this thing in such stark terms, first half, second half, it can sound like it's all neat and tidy and wrapped up in a bow. And obviously that's not life. So.
No, I think it's also non-linear. I think you go forward, you go back, you go forward, you think you've reached the second half enlightenment, and then nope, maybe that wasn't quite it. And you slide back to another little valley and have to rethink it in a different way. And so you're going at it, but you're going at it in different ways, and getting new enlightenments, or the enlightenment that hit you 6 months ago isn't the enlightenment that you're achieving 6 months later or something. So anyway.
Okay.
Enough said. Okay.
Anyone else want to add anything to that? Okay. All right. And William is here. So William is from Brooklyn, or is in Brooklyn. He's not from Brooklyn, but he's in Brooklyn. And so William, you get to say hi to Lisa too. This is her
Hi,
first.
William. You're a familiar face from the video as well.
Yes, he is. Another
Yeah.
famous video person. All
Ellen
right.
joined us this morning too.
Who's that?
Today, Ellen joined us too.
Oh, Ellen. Hello, Ellen. Good to see you, dear.
Hi, good to be here.
Yeah. And Ellen doesn't know Lisa either. But
Hi,
Ellen is just North County. Where are you at, Ellen?
Fullerton.
Fullerton. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So still relatively close, but just far enough away. All
Can I
right.
add one thing? I had fun one night. It was a work night, actually. So my daughter, who's a very sociable, gregarious girl, has had her 19-year-old boyfriend, and then Alex, who is a best friend from high school. He's, I think, 20. They taught me how to do Texas Hold'em, and I won. And my daughter,
Poker.
Texas Hold'em, yeah. So I'm the old school. It was 5-card stud or 5-card draw. I was never that creative, and he taught me how. But they're young people. I have 40 years ahead of them. So that's what my sister, my daughter said. Well, she has 40 years ahead of you. So, I don't make eye contact. I can bluff. And I didn't know I could. But these are young kids, right? And of course, Alex brought the chips because his dad plays. But we didn't put money because we were actually pretty much teaching my daughter. She never played. So I photocopied a cheat sheet. I would look at the cheat sheet, and my daughter, who's very, very honest, cannot lie, cannot have a poker face. She was using her finger to look at the cheat sheet, pointing at her, at her hands. So it was cute, and I loved it. There we go.
I'm impressed, Alan. That's pretty cool.
Oh yeah, that was fun. Yeah,
I've never played it. I have no idea.
Oh yeah. Once you have the cheat sheet next to you, it's easier.
That's good. I need that.
Yeah.
All right. The only thing, Ellen, is you got to know when to hold them and when to fold them.
Right.
When to walk away and when to run.
Well, there you go. You're
All
right.
right. So
Yeah,
you keep
and you
playing that
guys,
song.
you've never played before, no matter how much you've played, you say, I've never played this game before, and then you clean up.
But yeah, I learned from them. Yeah.
Okay, page 49. I wanted to back
Okay.
up just a couple of paragraphs so that we can get a little bit of a run at this. And actually, it was at 49, 48. He's talking about the loyal soldier and discharging the loyal soldier. And so he has basically talked about the loyal soldier as being the same as Freud's idea of the id, which is a more or less unconscious moralizer, the aggregate and the storehouse for all of the rules that we've learned by that time in our life. And so it's not really a conscience in the sense that it has this higher function and really is looking to deliver what love demands in any given moment. It's more looking at what rules do you follow? What do you obey? What do we do? What are the standards? This is why Jesus is trying to get us away from that when he says, don't judge. He's trying to get us into the conscious role, the intentional role of being someone who's present and aware in a given moment and can break the rules where necessary. So he's attaching the loyal soldier to that idea and saying, this is what we need to graduate from. We need to discharge the loyal soldier, which is all the identity that we think we have, in favor of what's coming next in the second half of life. That first full paragraph there on page 48, there's a deeper voice of God, which you must learn to hear and obey. And as Danielle said, obey was a word that she didn't like. So maybe you can say follow. A deeper voice of God, which you must learn to hear and follow, or hear and immerse in, whatever you like there in the second half of life. It will sound an awful like the voices of risk, of trust, of surrender, of soul, of common sense, of destiny, of love, of an intimate stranger, of your deepest self, of soulful Beatrice. The true faith journey only begins at this point. Up to now, everything is mere preparation. Finally, we have a container strong enough to hold the contents of our real life, which is always filled with contradictions and adventures and immense challenges. Psychological wholeness and spiritual holiness never exclude the problem from the solution. If it is wholeness, then it is always paradoxical and holds both the dark and the light sides of things. Wholeness and holiness will always stretch us beyond our small comfort zone. How could they not? And so a couple of things there is that when we are listening to the voice of God, it's going to sound risky. And that may sound counterintuitive to you, because isn't the voice of God supposed to sound peaceful and serene and welcoming? What the voice of God, if we're really listening to the voice of God and not to our rendition of what the voice of God should be in our minds, we are opening ourselves up to a vastness. We're opening ourselves up to something so much larger than we are used to, familiar with, comfortable with, that it is going to sound risky. And it is going to have these other attributes, risk, trust, surrender, common sense, destiny, love, whatever you put it. But it's going to be something that is pulling you on, in the same way that the call to the hero's journey that we talked about is pulling you on to something more. And because it's something more and something unknown, it feels scary. And not only that, as he says, up to now, everything that you have experienced in the first half of life is mere preparation. So all the identity that you have carved out for yourself at this point, you realize that's just the launching pad. That's just the open doorway into something completely other. And so there's that sense. And when Doug is talking about that, it's not just this light bulb that goes on. There's not a clear dividing line. But as you're moving more and more away from just life as usual, as you're answering the call and moving deeper into this unknown facet of God, there is that sense of disorientation and disturbance. At the very least, you're going to feel that. You move in, it can be a lot more than that. It can feel really as if everything that you thought you knew is falling down. I know that's the way it felt for me. Was someone trying to get in there?
Yeah, I was just saying, I really like this thing about the loyal soldier. So the loyal soldier would be the voice saying, stay the status quo, and would be kind of the opposite of that risk taking, or at least for me, maybe, would be more like trying to keep the first half going, or the status quo, and versus this voice that would be challenging that. Is it something like that?
It's something like that, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I know everybody's different, but
Yeah, but just naturally, we're going to want to stick with what's familiar. Once again, the devil we know is better than the devil we don't know. Even if our life feels less than, even if our life feels that it's unfulfilling or boring, mundane, or even stifling, it takes a lot to get us to be willing to let go of that in favor of something that we don't know yet. It's kind of like Jefferson said in the Declaration, we are going to suffer the evils while they are sufferable for as long as they are sufferable, before we're going to move out into the revolution, before we're going to move out into really advocating for fundamental change. It's going to take a lot to move us off that dime, because it's scary. And so I think this is something just to be aware of. It's going to have that disorientation and that disturbance attached to it as we move out into these directions. And the other thing is, it's going to be paradoxical. We're going to have to deal with paradox in a way that we haven't if we've only been attached to our loyal soldier, which is sensitive to contradiction and always rushes to choose one side or another so that it can feel certain, safe, right, even at the expense of everybody else who must be wrong. And so that is another natural tendency in the first half of life, to be binary that way. And now to move into this new kind of consciousness that is aware of these horns of the paradox, but to leave them in place unresolved and move through, is going to be another experience that is also disconcerting. All right. Sounds like fun, right? You all want to jump into the second half life now, right?
Well, I want to point out too, what you said last week too, is that a loyal soldier could also be the gang member, right? Or the mob family. You follow the rules, but it takes a lot of risk and courage to get out of that, that group, that you're no longer the loyal soldier. Say, no, I'm getting out, or I'm defying this rule.
And you're touching on a whole nother aspect of this, Ellen, is that as you start moving out of the loyal soldier or out of that camp, then all of the people that you were with and all of the people that look to you as one of their own suddenly start looking at you differently. You're not comfortable to them anymore because you are now challenging what they believe. You're challenging their loyal soldier. And so there is a lot of loss that can be associated with this as well as you move through it. And you find that, yeah, the familiar faces are not familiar anymore. And that idea of standing in liminal space where you've got one foot in both camps and nobody trusts you fully because you're not fully in their camp. And so there's that sense of moving out, maybe of isolation for a time as you leave the camp that you were in. So yeah, that's another aspect of this as well.
Yeah, but I would think that's also scary for that individual who's
Of course
moving
it is.
out. Like scary.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to really want this because everything in you is going to want to run back to the familiar, run back to the safety of what is familiar. And to keep on going is sometimes difficult to do. That's why, and the point he's going to make later on, it's usually because you have either a very good guide who is helping you and encouraging you along, or you have enough trauma behind you that it is a motivating force. But usually it's one of the two that keeps us going, especially earlier in life. Okay, continuing on. So God, life, and destiny have to loosen the loyal soldier's grasp on your soul, which up to now has felt like the only you that you know and the only authority that there is. Our loyal soldier normally begins to be discharged somewhere between the ages of 35 and 55, if it happens at all. Before that, it is usually mere rebellion or iconoclasm. So that, I wish Becky was here, because there's that 35 again. See, it's not just me saying this. But yeah, 35 to 55, that's usually when it starts to occur, although we're seeing older folks, just.
It's the Western stinking thinking when you give numbers like that.
Yeah. Hey, it's a 20-year range. That's enough. But I was talking about the midlife crisis, area, right in the mid-30s there, and so on and so forth. But the interesting thing he says here, if it starts before that, it's usually mere rebellion or iconoclasm. That's a really interesting statement, because there is a difference. Are we deconstructing just because we want to be different? That's still an egoic position. Are we deconstructing because we got a chip on our shoulder because we got hurt before and now this is our payback? That's an egoic based position as well. Or is it really the deconstruction that we need in order to get down to the bottom of the dog pile and be able to see what's really what? And that's something only the individual may not know. The people around may be able to tell the difference, but it's all the difference in the world between those two. To let go of the loyal soldier will be a severe death and an exile from your first base. You will feel similar to Isaiah before he was sent into exile in Babylon. Quote, in the noontime of my life, see, Becky, there's the 30s again. I was told to depart for the gates of Hades. Surely I am deprived the rest of my years. Discharging your loyal soldier will be necessary to finding authentic inner authority, or what Jeremiah promised as the law written in your heart. First half of life, folks, will seldom have the courage to go forward at this point unless they have a guide, a friend, a Virgil, a Tiresias, a Beatrice, a soul friend, or a stumbling block to guide them toward the goal. There's that strong guide or strong trauma. That's usually what's driving us, right? Or a combination of both. There are few in our religious culture who understand the necessity of mature, internalized conscience. So wise guides are hard to find, as opposed to wise guys, which are easy to find, right? You will have many more errands building your golden calves than Moses's leading you on any exodus. Normally, we will not discharge our loyal soldier until he shows himself to be wanting, incapable, inadequate for the real issues of life, as when we confront love, death, suffering, subtlety, sin, mystery, and so on. It is another form of the falling and dying that we keep talking about. The world mythologies all point to places like Hades, Sheol, hell, purgatory, the realm of the dead. Maybe these are not so much the alternative to heaven as the necessary path to heaven.
Sure.
There's an interesting statement. So going back to the beginning of that paragraph, normally we will not discharge our loyal soldier until he shows himself to be wanting, incapable, inadequate for the real issues of life. You've probably heard me say that, you know, what we believe cognitively is a placeholder. It's a paradigm. And if that paradigm is true enough for us at the moment, it allows us to be able to accept life on life's terms, good, bad, and the ugly. And it also allows us to, in the face of that, still live with hope and gratitude. And if we are living that way, then we can say that what we believe is true. But at the same time, to realize that we're only one trauma away from it not being true anymore. And that is the cyclical nature of this thing. That new traumas, new losses, especially losses of identity, which is what we typically grieve over, call everything back into question. And so when that loyal soldier is shown to be wanting or incapable or inadequate for the issues of life as they're presenting to us, that's when we end up taking another cycle of the hero's journey. That's what Doug is, I think, talking about, that this process of moving into the second half of life is not just once and for all, but it is still cyclical, and layers of the onion are still coming off the more and more we go. And so life, the abrasion of life, is what's really moving us through this process. And when we realize that what we have and what we've now become familiar with is no longer capable of getting us through the trauma du jour, then we realize we need to step up to the next level, move that much further out into the unknown and that mystery of God.
There's a really interesting kind of poetic illustration of that recognition of the limitations of the royal soldier in Les Mis. Near the end of Les Mis, the policeman who's been pursuing Jean Valjean comes to realize that Jean Valjean is a good man, and that his legalistic attitude towards things is inadequate to define or grasp the nature of this good man. Now, sadly, the policeman takes his life at that point, but his loyal soldier is shattered, annihilated at that realization that is inadequate.
Mm-hmm. I forgot about that. It's been so long since I've read the book. But yeah, that's a great illustration of it. And the realization that your loyal soldier is inadequate can be that shattering, you know, or it can be anywhere in between. I think the more of these circuits you take, the more you start to get used to it. You know, not that it doesn't hurt every time, not that it isn't, you know, really disorienting and disturbing every time. But once again, I think that's the beauty of having this map. Maybe if the policeman had the map, had the shape of the journey, he could have overcome the shattering, because you know that there's a reason for it, you know that there is purpose in it, and you know that there's something on the other side. But if you don't know that, and it's just your whole identity and your worldview and everything that you have built your life on is suddenly gone, I mean, what do you do with that? It's a really tough proposition. That's why it's so important for us to be forearmed with some of this, you know, as we're moving into this crisis of meaning and purpose that is usually the impetus for moving into the second half of life. It helps. It really makes a difference. I wish I had had this information 30 years ago. It would have really helped. But no.
David,
Yeah.
I was watching something on the Science and Non-Duality YouTube channel there, and they were doing this series on death. And one of the presenters was talking about the mini debts, and I know we talked about contemplative practice in here being like one of the mini debts and so on. But he was saying every time you're disappointed, like every time you're let down or things don't go the way you want them to go, you can mourn that in a small way and allow it to be a tiny death of the ego, where you kind of just let go of this need to be in control, this need to be right, this need to be satisfied. And kind of, I've been trying to practice that and kind of weave that letting go of the ego into the course of the day, essentially. Like missing a green light or something like that. Just, allowing that to be just another moment to surrender. And I like the idea of letting go of the loyal soldier.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be this catastrophic, murderous death of the loyal soldier. It could just be this, you're not running the show anymore.
Honorably discharged.
Yes.
So Tin, in order to be able, and you're absolutely right, in order to be able to do that though, we have to know that there's something left after the loyal soldier is discharged. And that's the difference. If we think the loyal soldier is us, is all of us, then that's not a little death, that's real death to us. And so if we start through contemplation and through our spiritual formation and everything we're talking about, we are starting to have an experience of the deeper self that continues to exist regardless of all of the egoic manifestations, then we can start to do this in a cohesive way. We can start to do this in a way that doesn't feel like the big death. It's still a little death, Every time we go into meditation and centering prayer, that's a little death when we step away from the ego that way. But it's important for us to realize it's a manifestation of us, it's part of us, it's a tool, but it's not who we are.
I was going to touch on what I was kind of thinking along the lines of William. Sometimes I've been processing a lot of stuff. I would say maybe it's the wrong word I'm going to use, but a little bit of grief, where you're giving up something and it's dying, and you're I don't know if it's grieving its loss, but you're saying goodbye in a way. And I don't know. I've been dealing with some grief with parents and stuff, and allowing myself to grieve and allowing some things in the past to let go. But it's hard to just let go without a kind of a grieving process or a process emotionally to do that. Anyway, for me, I've had to do a little bit of that, letting go of some of your old self, and the engineer or the this or the parents or whatever, just allowing, rather than saying, well, I don't know if it's, maybe just the loyal soldier says, no, you're not supposed to grieve that, or and I kind of said, damn it, I am going to go ahead and grieve anyway, and finding that therapeutic. So, and I think it was a loyal soldier just saying, no, don't do that. You're supposed to be above that. So anyway.
Big boys don't cry, right, Doug?
That's right. Don't want to be a big baby.
Yeah, and there's a lot of those voices that are still in us from all the way back. But we have to grieve, and the grief is a process.
Right.
The grieving is always attached to a loss of identity. What we grieve is something that our identity has been attached to in some way.
Right.
And that's the scary part of it. Who are we then when we lose this? Whatever this is, from a person to a job to a location. Our identity gets attached to that. It becomes familiar. It becomes part of the loyal soldier, and then we lose it. Then what happens? Now we're back into this period of this process of the unknown. Let's read a little bit more. Oh, the last bit of that paragraph, the world mythologies all point to places like Hades, Sheol, hell, purgatory, and the realm of the dead. So this is the idea of this trauma, this grief, this hitting bottom, right? And then coming back up the other side. But so often in the world's mythologies, there is that shape of the journey. And you have to descend into hell, into these lower places before you can come back up the other side. That's the stripping away process. That's everything that we're talking about here. Allowing yourself to be able to do that, to feel that, is all part of it. And maybe these are, he says, not so much the alternative to heaven, but the necessary path to heaven, which I think he's right on there. I don't know how that hits you, but we all need to go through that process. We all need to go through the descent. And just like Jesus descended into the tomb for 3 days and then came up the other side, that's the shape of it. And we see that over and over again, even in biblical literature. Jonah goes into the belly of the beast. Noah goes into the belly of the ark. Moses, for the second third of his life, ends up in the back of beyond in the Midian herding sheep before he can come out and lead. But we see the shape to that. Paul, who is struck blind for several days and then goes into Arabia for 14 years before he comes back. And so that shape is always there in scripture, but also in the world's stories and myths and legends as well, because it is the psychological shape of our lives. It's a necessary shape, and we have to recognize it. And unfortunately, the church really hasn't done that for us. So we need to impose that over our church experience or any other way that we're living out our spiritual formation. If it's not going to be structured for us, then we need to structure it for ourselves. And that takes a lot more energy.
Dave, just a quick comment. Just in my own personal journey with a physical illness, specifically, I was really mad at God. I don't know if, I'm sure she can handle it, but I wish I'd known some of this too. I didn't at that point, but certainly Brady had gone through his, wild and crazy experience. And I had a lot of faith and could hang on during that. But boy, when it came to my own, I got really, really angry at her. And, I've worked through all of that now with the help of you and the group and everything we've been reading and doing. But I don't know if anybody else has had that experience. Sometimes I feel very guilty, but it's also at the point of when I was so angry and like, where are you? And that, and quiet and angry that small voice, quote voice, came to me as well. So I don't know, just a confession. I got really angry, but in the midst of the anger and the pain and the loss of complete identity of everything I had known, it was pretty powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And it did set me on a new, a lot of the ego was gone with that. And anyway, just wanted to throw that in. I don't know if anybody else has had that experience, but yeah, I got real mad.
Oh, come on. Has anyone ever been mad at God?
Thank you.
Has anyone ever not been mad at God? I think that's probably a better question, because newsflash, life is not fair.
No.
So if you're looking for fairness, you're going to be really disappointed and angry at God. And guess what? We all start out looking for and expecting fairness. The outrage of the 2 or 3 year old. That's not fair. I mean, that's where we come from. That's the whole deal. And so we start out and we have to get that beaten out of us, that life isn't going to be fair, but it's all going to reconcile in God. And that's the difference. And so we do need to go through what you're talking about, Beth. And yeah, everybody's going to have a different, nuance to their story, but the shape is the same. And I think the pain has to be great enough to really alter our course.
Yep.
It has to be great enough to do that. The pain that started my journey was something that I didn't know that I was going to survive, because it was just so great. And yet now I look back and I'm grateful for it, because it was the pain that was great enough to finally get me to start asking the deeper questions and to have the chutzpah to actually follow what answers were coming to me in the ways that they were. And so, yes, you've got to be at the point where you are ready to let go of everything that you hold dear. And that takes a lot of doing. To stand at the precipice and actually jump, that takes a lot of doing. And so, yeah, if being mad at God is part of the bargain, hey, small price to pay. Because like you said, God can take it. God
Thank
understands.
you. Thank you, Dave.
So Beth, I want to add my conversation.
Mhm.
That was, he says, vengeance is mine. Because I really wanted vengeance to this person that hurt me so much and Dave did. And I wanted him to have shingles, actually, because it's painful, but it's not deadly. But it's so painful enough that, okay, I will find Schadenfreude, right? It's called Schadenfreude. I learned that. So I said, yeah, you're so powerful. Vengeance is mine. And it's not for me to do that. It's yours. Then do it then. I'm still waiting. Right?
That's great, Ellen. That is great. Thank you.
That's where I'm at still. Yeah.
We should be more transparent, Ellen.
Yeah, I know, right?
That was good, Scott.
Just like in poker, I cannot be transparent. Yeah, but I'm learning.
Oh my gosh, leave it to a medical professional to come up with shingles.
Yes, yes.
That's perfect.
Well, see, this is the thing too I wanted to add when this one on page 49. And so it's kind of humorous, all right? The first paragraph that says between the ages of 35 to 55. So this is when the COVID vaccine came out. It says, I forgot, if you're 60 and so on, you qualify for this. And then we're saying, but what if you're 59 and a half? You're 59 years old in 11 months. You don't really technically qualify, but you could kind of like, that type of thing. We're concrete thinkers. So that's why I'm saying too, it's second half of life, 35, like Doug said, this is our Western culture. Yeah, 35, but what if you're 34 years old and a half? Yeah, and you're going through this. It's not really technically, that type of thing. It went through my head. It's crazy, right? But so you put 30-ish.
Yeah.
You scientists are so literal. I mean, I don't know what we're going to do with you guys. Good Lord. I get your point though.
Right, I know.
But just it's a spectrum, it's like autism, it's a spectrum and you're going to be on it someplace. And it's just
They should leave the numbers out of it and be fine.
well, we got to at least put some ballpark numbers in there.
It's your Western dualistic brain going there.
Mhm.
No, it's
and
just like the Filipino side of my family. Dinner starts at 7. They come 7-ish, 8-ish. It's not 7.
Oh, look at us. We're supposed to start at 6.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Come on.
And I
Yeah.
came on at 6:45, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, this is effect time. So we understand that.
There you
So
go.
yes, there is wiggle room here. But generally it is very, very, very unusual for a 20-something in this culture, especially, to be able to get on the bandwagon for the second half of life. There has to be something really, really spectacular going on to be able to kickstart the journey that early. And it is rare in the 30s. It is getting more possible in the 40s and the 50s, and even the 60s. That's when the people that I'm working with, those are the ones, usually 50s and 60s, sometimes 40s, but very rarely younger than that, unless there's really some trauma going on. There's something happening. and that can kickstart it. So his general, range of 35 to 55 is pretty good,
And that's
but
when you
it's not
start.
definitive.
That's when you start, like but it doesn't mean you have it figured out by your 35 or 45.
Oh, of course not. Of course not. Yeah, this is not a light switch, And this is something that I think we're just going to be doing not only from the rest of our lives here, but I think whatever eternity is going to be. We're never going to exhaust the possibilities of God. So there will always be a becoming, and becoming becomes a permanent status or state for us. Always becoming, always willing to shed our skin and then move into the next larger iteration.
I think that's what I was trying to ask before. I think the always becoming, it's not like you have it figured out by 55. You're in the process maybe by then, but doesn't mean like, okay, you're 65, you got to have this all figured out now. You're always moving forward, continual.
But there is that magic 51% mark, when we click over, and at some point, more often than not, we are living in this kingdom realm and our character has changed. And at that point, we become people who can really be in relationship. And even though we're still becoming, and even though we'll never get to 100 in this scenario, there is that point at which we do, I think, move over into a new character.
And what age is that?
That is not attached to any.
That would be 59 and a half.
In other words, if you're 65 and 3/4 and you don't have it all figured out, is that a bad thing? No.
Yeah, 65 and 3/4 is good too.
Yeah. Well, and for myself, like my milestones were like when I realized I went from hateful to being grateful. That was kind of a whole like, okay, I don't hate all this stuff anymore. And then I think the next one was because my whole life, I always wanted to have stuff figured out. That was my sense of security. If I could understand it, I feel safe and it's okay. Got to the point where I can rest in God's mystery. And that was there was a Wednesday night and physically was there. And it was just like, wow, this is kind of weird. I'm okay with uncertainty right now. And again, it's just, there wasn't necessarily the bolt of lightning that parted my hair and, or was doing backflips like John Belushi and the Blues Brothers and stuff. It was more that, oh, fascinating kind of stuff. And then roughly about a year ago, going through this again, it was the realization of, yeah, I'm always going to have unresolved issues, and I'm okay with that. I don't know what the next one necessarily is, but certainly having people that I can have these discussions with, because I can remember a lot of times I felt like I was crazy because I couldn't really discuss this stuff with other people. I think it's kind of a dirty secret for some people if you don't have community, when you get into these existential questions and stuff. And again, maybe it just happens to be because I was so much in my head and everything had to be figured out. But yeah, I don't think I would have been able to navigate it the way I have without having you guys around.
Yeah.
That's why we're here.
Yes.
Empathic.
Okay, let's read a little bit more. Even Jesus, we're at the top of page 50. Even Jesus, if we are to believe the Apostles' Creed. How many of you said the Apostles' Creed in church? Did any of you other? Okay, yeah, you remember the Apostles' Creed where he descends into hell? Even Jesus, if we are to believe the Apostles' Creed of the church, descended into hell before he ascended into heaven. Isn't it strange how we missed that? Every initiation rite I studied worldwide was always about dying before you die. When you first discharge your loyal soldier, it will feel like a loss of faith or a loss of self. But it is only the death of the false self. And it is often the very birth of the soul.
It is.
It is.
But one of the things that I thought as I read that last line in Ital there, it's not really the death of the false self, because the false self doesn't die. In fact, the false self needs to live and carry on because that's our egoic interface with the rest of the world. So as long as we're breathing here, we need that loyal soldier. But what does die is the identification with that false self. That's what really, that that link gets broken, or at least loosened, to the extent that we can start to see that that is not the totality of ourselves. And that's traumatic enough in itself. But that's the only kind of caveat that I would put on that line there. But when you first discharge your loyal soldier, it will feel like a loss of faith or a loss of self. And that certainly is. I mean, does anyone have that experience?
Oh, yeah.
That break that just changed things? Yeah. And is that how it felt to you? Did it feel like this loss, this, I don't know, suddenly you're off balance? I mean, I remember the way I put it in one of my journal entries is that all the walls were falling down around me until I just had one wall at my back that at least I could lean on and at least limit the attack to 180 degrees. And then I felt that wall fall down as well. And then it was like I was bobbing in a landless ocean. There was just nothing but water 360 degrees. I remember that was the sensation of it. But
But you know, like as Randy said, the revelation or the understanding that it's okay to have non-clarity. It was kind of a light bulb moment. I think this concept that honorably discharging your loyal soldier is sort of like that same thing.
mm-hmm.
It's not your identity. It's just like almost congratulating him for a good job, well done. But you're being discharged, or you're being brought down to you're not in the command anymore. You can be an advisor, like you said, maybe you don't kill them or whatever, but you're honorably discharging. I think that can be like a revelation, like on the kin of the it's okay to have non-clarity. To me, anyway, that's where I'm at.
Okay.
It's a new discovery, a new anchor, a new post of understanding that is very useful. It's not like everything is in itself the revelation, but it's a stepping stone. It's like clarity, not having clarity is a stepping stone, and this is like a stepping stone to that kind of that awakening or that new way of looking at your life. So anyway, that's how I have to look at it.
Yeah, well, for me, the clarity is that there is no certainty, and most things that I think is clarity is my ego. Back to, again, knowing that I crave certainty. So, but in God's realm, it's the best word I can apply, and I think Rohr uses it. It's mystery. All that is, you may have heard me joke around. Is it odd or is it God? And anymore, it's all God. The tragedy, God, if the cornerstone of so many people's Christian faith, certainly mine, was God is everywhere and everywhere. Okay, so God's in the tragedy. All the stuff is that I would say, how can there be a God when this kind of stuff happens? How does a loving God allow this kind of stuff? God's there. Can't see it, don't understand it. God's there. I'm getting the goosebumps right now. And that's the stuff that's freaking crazy. But I'm okay with it. Which again comes back to I must be crazy. Can laugh at. Does that again, it seems crazy as I said. Does that make any sense to anyone in the group?
Not a bit, Randy. I don't understand.
Thank you. Well, again, so once again, I'll go sit at the little kids' table.
I understand you're crazy. I get that.
Yeah,
I've
we
been
should
called
probably call in a well check.
Yeah, I've been called much worse for much worse things.
No, Randy, you're right on it, and absolutely get that. You know, I think it's important as he talks about when you first discharge your loyal soldier, you'll feel like a loss of faith. Again, that sort of speaks to that light switch that you can just flip. And it's not like that. You know, when I was talking about the walls falling down, that was over a period of probably years, you know, where certain things would start to fall away. I'd let go of certain things. I'd become more receptive to letting go of my rock hard held, you know, beliefs. So there's moments, I suppose, but it's really a process. and a continuous process. But you do feel moments along the way, of course. And I do remember when that last wall fell down, as I would characterize it, just a real sense of, almost panic for a moment, like, oh my God, now what? What do I do? This last thing, if this last thing, I can't rely on that either. There was that momentary feeling of that. But it is a process. And so we just get on the process and we keep showing up to it, and stuff will happen. But the interesting thing is, it's not under our control. It's not like you control the process. You show up to the process and you keep showing up, and stuff is happening that you're not really aware of. And the progress you're making, you're not really aware of while it's happening. You just keep showing up to the process. And then at some point, it's usually someone else that remarks that they see a change in you, or you walk into a situation and you realize you can handle it differently. So the change is happening and things are going on that you're not really aware of at the time. And that's really as it should be, because if we're so focused on specific outcomes and trying to make them happen and checking them off our list, then we're not really in the process. We are totally under the control of the loyal soldier at that point, because that's the way the ego works. And so to be out of control to a certain extent, to be, leaning into the mystery, as Randy puts it, is really more what it feels like. And I don't know if we're just muddying the waters for a lot of you, but just trying to characterize this thing. At least, if none of that really makes a heck of a lot of sense, at least know that there's nothing real hard and fast about this. You're going to have your own experience. And if you get really angry at God the way Beth did, praise God, that's fine. Or anything in between, allow it to happen. But as long as it's feeling unfamiliar, that's a good thing. Because if it's feeling familiar, then you're still within the pale, you're still within the confines. And this is all about breaking through those self-imposed limitations, or those that have been imposed for us by our elders. All right. Let's read a little more. Instead of being ego-driven, you will begin to be soul-drawn. The wisdom and guidance you will need to get you across this chasm will be like Charon ferrying you across the river Styx, or Hermes guiding the soul across all scary boundaries. These are your authentic soul friends, and we now sometimes call them spiritual directors or elders. Celtic Christianity called them Anamkara, which literally means in Gaelic, soul friend. And these were the ones who came alongside, and they were the spiritual directors. They were the elders. They were the guides that helped the neophytes to be able to navigate, through the difficulties, especially early on. Remember that Hercules, Orpheus, Aeneas, Psyche, and our Odysseus all traveled into realms of the dead and returned. Most mythologies include a descent into the underworld at some point. Jesus, as we said, also descended into hell. And only on the third day did he ascend into heaven. Most of life is lived, as it were, on the first and second days, the threshold days, when transformation is happening, but we do not know it yet. In men's work, we call this liminal space. There he is giving voice to that idea that we're showing up to a process, but we don't know how it works, and we're not really even cognizant of the change that's happening. Transformation is happening. We don't know it yet. We're going to know it later. That's what he's calling this liminal space. St. John of the Cross taught that God has to work in the soul in secret and in darkness, because if we fully knew what was happening and what mystery, transformation, God, grace will eventually ask of us, we would either try to take charge or stop the whole process. No one oversees his or her own demise willingly, even when it is the false self that is dying. That's a great line. Who gives up power voluntarily? Who does that? Well, nobody does that. If we really think we've got power, we're not going to give it up, because that's our lifeline. But once we realize that the power that we think we have is an illusion, we can give up the illusion. And that's the difference. But to oversee our own demise willingly, yeah, if we knew what we were in for, we would then be trying to control it, even in ways that we weren't totally conscious of. So I love that John of the Cross, that God has to work in the soul in secret and in darkness. Mystery, transformation, God, grace, and God and grace is asking of us everything, basically, as far as the ego is concerned. God has to undo our illusions secretly, as it were, when we are not watching and not in perfect control, say the mystics. That is perhaps why the best word for God is actually mystery. We move forward in ways that we do not even understand, and through the quiet workings of time and grace. When we get there, we are never sure just how it happened. And God does not seem to care who gets the credit as long as our growth continues. As St. Gregory of Nyssa already said in the 4th century, sin happens whenever we refuse to keep growing. And sin here understood not as unlawful actions, immoral actions, but sin understood as missing the highest good. That's really what sin is about, missing the mark of the full unity that God represents. That would be the sin. So missing the mark of greatest goodness happens whenever we refuse to keep growing because we're not becoming anymore. We're not continuing to move toward that greatest good. And that is the contemplative process, to continue moving us into those areas outside of the limitations of our egoic consciousness.
But I was having a devil's advocate thought on that last.
Oh, please tell us.
When I was thinking about this idea of, when we stop thinking about personal growth, there's something there as well, versus, sin happens whenever we refuse to keep growing. Maybe my thought doesn't fully apply here. I'm thinking of two very different concepts, but I'm thinking like I was going back to a first half of life kind of self-improvement mindset.
Oh yeah.
That is very much, and it feels like that's different from what she's talking about here.
Oh, it's very different. And in fact, if you are thinking of this in terms of perfect growth, then you're still under the control of your loyal soldier.
Yes.
Because the growth we're talking about is going to be experienced as a loss of self. It's going to be experienced as just a falling into the otherness of everyone else. It's going to be the exact opposite of this idea of personal self-development or self-growth that then can allow us to be the sage or to be the one who stands head and shoulders above the rest. All of that is egoic. And so I'm glad you brought that up, because it is experienced very differently. And of course, that's exactly what Jesus said. If you want to find your life, you have to lose it. And that's the experience of it. So if we're thinking of it that way and categorizing it that way, even though he's talking about growth here, it's not that kind of growth.
Right.
So that just makes it even more confusing, doesn't it? These are all the paradoxes. These are all of the dilemmas that Jesus or really any responsible wisdom teacher is posing.
Well, I think one form, the first personal growth, the first half personal growth involves an element of effort. And the second half it becomes more and more effortless.
Yeah, I mean, myself, it went from work to being effort is the words to do it. I mean, I don't know, maybe again, I'm not as far along as I'd like to be and stuff. I think there's a commitment every day of surrendering. So there's effort applied in such. But yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily anything that I've ever done previous in my life that I might name that. So.
But I'm thinking that as we get better at this, as the truth sets us free, right? Whatever that looks like, it should involve less and less effort.
Well, that's really, I know exactly what you're saying. That's why I like the analogy of the tightrope walker, right? Okay, so the tightrope walker walks across the cable as easily as we walk across the room, but there isn't a moment that he or she isn't completely balanced and using the pole and the energy, the effort, everything that they are doing, whether they're doing it the first time or the 100th or 1000th time, is the same, but it's not experienced the same because it becomes part of our muscle memory. It becomes part of who we are and what we do. And so it feels easier as we do it, but we're still doing it. You know, to be fully present in a situation and not relying on rules or laws or preset standards, but to be completely open to what is going on, empathetic, compassionate, and making your choices in real time for what love demands, that takes full awareness and concentration. But as you get better at it, it feels easier, it feels more natural. But at the moment that we stop the energy flow, then we're back flopped down to one side or another, and we're now back in that dualistic kind of consciousness.
Yeah, I guess in regards to as I'm chewing on this and stuff, the effort, if it's getting easier, I don't fight it as much. I don't.
That's another good way to look at it.
I don't
Yeah.
resist it as much as before. But again, I have to apply myself there. Again, I have to be very intentional in being in the present, in the moment.
Right. It is effort. It is effort, but it's a different kind of effort. It's like when I catch myself holding my tension in my shoulder, it takes effort for me to relax, but it's not the same effort as I know I expend more energy by being unconscious and holding my tension in my shoulder.
Yep, I relate very much.
And maybe Randy's way of putting it is maybe the best. We just don't resist it as much. We just let it flow, and we trust it more. We lean into it more, but we're still doing it. We have to keep doing it. We have to keep showing up. So, all right. Well, I think we lost Lisa. We threw her into the deep end of the pool without a book, without a paddle. She didn't have a book to row with on that one, but hopefully she will be back. All right, we are at time. So again, everyone, thanks so much. Hopefully all of this meandering, we're giving you a little bit clearer picture, at least to relax about your own experience. And don't feel like you have to conform or fit into anybody else's experience, not Richard Rohr's, not anyone's, because it will be your own. And don't assume that it's wrong because it's not checking the boxes that you read on page 59. Okay, that if we can at least get that much across, that's a good thing. All right, Scotty.
Father God, we're so grateful to be here with you, learning and sharing. We're digging around for truth, Lord. You say you are the truth, and the truth sets us free. So let us be connected with you, be intimate with you in our communications and relationship. Lord, let us just follow your guidance and your leading and trust you so that we can graduate from first half to second half and let the loyal soldier be on his way. Thanks for hearing our prayers. It's in your mighty and precious holy name that we pray and give our thanks and say our amens. Amen, Jesus.
Amen. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you Sunday, one way or another.
Bye, Ray.
Say bye-bye.
Thank you.
Good night, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
And let's see, Jordana and Linda and Sherry.
Night.
Good night, you
Hi,
guys.
Sherry.
All right.
Night.
See you Saturday, Sunday.
All right.
Okay, bye-bye.